Okay, before we get started this week, look what I got. Okay, I got coloured pens. I cannot emphasise how excited I am about this. So it means we can turn our title card into something more colourful. So welcome back to our series on National 5 RUAE. This week we're continuing on with sentence structure questions. Let's get into it. So what do we need to know about sentence structure questions this week? Well, just like word choice questions, these are analysis questions. They're essentially asking you to explain and identify creative use of different sentence structures. So instead of using a basic or boring sentence, what has the author done to make their sentence more engaging? They're often worth 2 marks or 4 marks, depending on how many things they're getting you to look for. And it's worth noting that they often come up not as part of their own question, not as specifically sentence structure questions, but as part of use of language questions. We will come back to these in another video, but just know that use of language questions can involve sentence structure questions as well. And finally, a lot of pupils can find these types of questions quite overwhelming. I think it's just because there's so many different things they could answer for this question, so I'll try and break it down and make it as easy as I can for you. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce you to this word ripple, alright? R-I-P-L-L. Now, it's not a word you can use every day, but it's a way of helping you remember what sort of things you can mention in these sentence structure questions. So R, repetition. Have words or phrases been repeated? I, inversion. Is the word out of order? Does it seem a bit unfamiliar? Does it sound like the way Yoda would speak? P, punctuation. What about the punctuation stands out to you? L, length. Is it a particularly long or particularly short sentence being used? And finally, list. Okay, is a list being used? Something to note is that when you're in the exam, you might come across something that doesn't fit neatly into one of those categories, but nevertheless it might jump out to you. Don't ignore that feeling, because usually if it's jumping out to you, they're wanting you to comment on it in some way. So make sure you've quoted it, even if you can't refer to a specific technique. One formula that you can use to answer this question is TQAL. T is technique, so what part of ripple is that you're going to mention? Remember what ripple stands for. Q, quotation. That's where you quote from the passage. A, analysis. Explain why that sentence is effective. Emphasis on the explaining. Why did the author pick that particular sentence structure? Why did they include that? You're analysing, you're explaining. And link. This is where you make sure that you have answered the question. So, you might wonder why I've put link in brackets. Well, I think that most of you will unintentionally put that in with analysis, but it is important to make sure that you've answered the question. So read the question again, make sure that your answer matches up with what they have asked. So if you've not done that in your analysis, you need to add another bullet point for linking. Let's go over a quick example then. So we'll start off with no, not happening, never in a million years, and even then it would be too soon. Okay? So our question is, explain how the author uses sentence structure to show the reluctance. As you can see, this is worth 4 marks. So you need to find 2 examples and explain them both. I'll give you a moment to have a look for those 2 examples on your own. The 2 examples I would pick are this first bit, no, not happening. And I would also go for, and even then it would be too soon. Remember, you can highlight things and underline things in the passage if you need to help you remember things. We'll start off with this first one, no, not happening. So, start off with technique, okay? Which technique is being used here? Remember, we use ripple. So, are we using repetition here? Nope. Inversion? Punctuation? Nope. We are thinking about sentence length. So what you'll notice here is that the author has used very short sentences. So that is what we are going to put for our technique. We've got short sentences. Next thing is our quotation, so we just write in that bit that we underlined, the no, not happening. So the last thing is our analysis, and that is where we just explain why that was significant. So short sentences add emphasis to the word no, which emphasises how little the author wanted to do something. If I felt like that didn't quite answer the question and I had more space on my board, I would put in an L. So I would need to add in that link, make sure I've answered the question. So all of that would get you 2 marks, but our question is worth 4 marks. So we need to repeat the process and do it again. We'll do the same thing then with the other thing we underlined. And even then it would be too soon. So it's not repetition, it's not inversion, but it is punctuation. So here we can see that they've used brackets. This is known as parenthesis, using 2 brackets, dashes or commas to add extra information. So our technique is parenthesis, our quote is and even then it would be too soon. Then we have to analyse. So that's why we go into detail and explain exactly why the author chose that. So they used parenthesis to add extra information about how little they wanted to do it, to add that little funny aside, to add a sense of humour and to really emphasise how little they didn't want to do it. Now, the answer that I'd written down I was not too happy about, so just to make sure that I definitely answered the question, I then went back and added in a link. Okay, so this week I didn't want to overwhelm you with some top tips, so I thought I'd leave it to the words of Anton Chekhov, who was a very famous playwright. He said, "Knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice." And you have to do quite a lot for sentence structure questions, so you will get quicker and quicker if you practice. Okay, so I'll leave you with that. I'll see you next week. Good luck. Bye.